Having grown up playing Jak and Daxter, I was really excited to find out that the handheld spin-off Daxter was added to the PS Plus library fairly recently. Because of that, I figured I would give it a shot and see what I had been missing out on. And after experiencing everything that this handheld port has to offer, I have some praise as well as some criticisms to throw towards the franchise's most talkative Otzel. But before we get to that, I want to quickly go over where this game came from just to give a little background. Daxter is an interesting diversion from the main series in more ways than one. Firstly, if the title didn't make it clear, this is the first game to focus on Daxter, the smart mouth sidekick of the main series, instead of just Jak. Secondly, while technically being the fourth game in the series, it instead chose to take place between the first two games to fill in the gaps, instead of choosing to move forward in the timeline. And thirdly, this is the first game in the series to not be handled by Naughty Dog themselves, instead being developed by Ready at Dawn. Nowadays, they might be known today as an Oculus studio owned by Meta, but they originally worked on PSP spin-off games and ports of established series before eventually creating their own IP with the Order 1886 before they were acquired by Facebook. After looking into their history, I was surprised to find out that Daxter was actually their first game that they released back in early 2006, but it started to make more sense once I learned that the studio was founded by former Naughty Dog employees. Given their background with the world and tone of Jak and Daxter, it comes as no surprise that Daxter as a standalone title is able to hold on to the sort of charm that made it such a memorable series in the first place. Charm, however, can only take you so far. It's equally important in my opinion that there be a good story to back it up. And the story of Daxter, while it takes place during an interesting gap in the main overall story, is fairly simple all things considered. You are thrust into the time right before Jak is freed from prison, which in Jak 2 is explained as a 2-year time skip where Daxter is doing who knows what. Now, in Daxter, you learn that he was indeed not doing much of anything until the last few months of those 2 years, which is where the story begins for us in this game. When we start the game, we see Daxter escaping from the Crimson Guard that has captured Jak at the beginning of Jak 2. After this, we cut forward to almost 2 years later where Daxter is in a bar recounting how he has tried to rescue Jak multiple times, and after giving up, seems to spend most of his time talking himself up. It is during one of these days spent in this bar that Daxter is introduced to his new employer, Osmo. Having overheard Daxter talking, Osmo decides to take on Daxter as an exterminator tasked with ridding Haven City of metal bugs, which are smaller versions of the metalhead enemies present in the other games. He needed the extra help because his last exterminator died and he has been being harassed by a man named Caden, who is trying to shut down his business. Given all of that, Osmo just gives us a fly swatter, and for a while we just go from place to place killing a certain number of enemies in order to unlock the next area. After about a third of the way in, things get more complicated as we meet a woman named Taryn, who for seemingly no reason sees fit to occasionally give us upgrades to our weapons. I'm unclear if maybe I just missed a story-based reason for why she does this, but regardless, that's one of the major ways we end up progressing. Eventually, while all this is going on, we see Jak being transported by a prison vehicle, and after seemingly being reminded that we were trying to accomplish rescuing him in the first place, we chase after it before being surrounded by prison guards and rescued by Osmo's son. After that, he will occasionally help us try and find a way to save Jak while we continue to do our job for Osmo. At the end of all of this, we are thrust into the last main level of the game where we have to confront Caden, the man who is trying to close down the extermination shop. Yeah, so it turns out that he is actually a metalhead bug in a human disguise. Kind of came out of nowhere, but I guess they had to tie that together in some way. After we finally defeat him and find out how to break Jak out of prison, we are pretty much caught up with the events of Jak 2. The game ends with Daxter telling this story to Jak and all their friends in the bar that he started in. Kind of a full circle moment there. Now at the beginning of this rambling, I said that the story was fairly simple, and I could see why it might not seem as simple as I said it was, but I can't stress enough how in the background the story is. I truly found myself forgetting what I was even doing plot-wise most of the time. And while that might sound really bad, it could have been a lot worse. Would I have liked Daxter to have a more compelling story to go along with the gameplay? Honestly, I don't really know. It kind of works for a character as unserious as Daxter usually is, and for just how the game is laid out. For the most part, you're going to be focusing on the gameplay and platforming anyway, to the point that you aren't really paying attention to the story that much. But speaking of that, how is the gameplay? The combat in Daxter starts out pretty simple as you start out attacking bugs with your fly swatter. But once you meet Taryn and she gives you a bug spray blaster that can also act as a flamethrower and grenade launcher, as well as a jetpack, things become a little more interesting. While adding those weapon types into the game freshened things up a little bit, I would be lying if I didn't say that it would have gone pretty stale pretty quickly if that's all they did, but luckily they decided to make it an integral part of platforming, which is the other major aspect of this game. Going in this direction fixes a lot of the early issues I had with the game before getting to the blaster. Not only does it make combat a lot quicker and varied, which allowed me to play the game without getting bored longer, but also made for a lot of great challenges as I tried to balance fuel for combat and traversal. It did, however, also come with some problems that had me staring at my screen in disbelief as I ended up dying over and over again to the same few challenges that really should not have been that difficult. Since your blaster basically doubles as a short-range jetpack for platforming, you have to pick up fuel or eco in order to go longer distances without falling. That's all well and good, but I often found hitting those eco pickups to be too precise to do certain sections consistently. I did eventually improve, so it could have been a skill issue, I will admit, but a lot of the time the depth fell off, causing me to miss the marks. Skill issue or depth issue, I felt that probably could have been avoided by just making those fuel pickups a little bigger with their hitboxes. Beyond that, I found the platforming enjoyable, with varied levels ranging from underground train stations to logging mills and everything in between. Besides the main platforming missions, you also come across minigames and vehicle levels as you travel around your small corner of Haven City. There isn't much to them, but they do a good job of switching things up every now and then. The vehicle sections are timed levels where you are either tasked with purifying a number of plants or chasing down a metal bug in order to defeat it. The game mixes up things a little bit by changing the location or how exactly you defeat the metal bugs, but they aren't really a challenge. It is fun to drive around a new location for a bit though. Really just adds to the whole atmosphere of making it feel like you're really in Haven City. The minigames aren't tied to any mission in-game and instead take place in Daxter's dreams whenever he decides to sleep at the exterminator shop. These minigames take Daxter to different movie settings like The Matrix and The Lord of the Rings. While the settings might change, you are basically doing the same thing, just with a different coat of paint. As Daxter, you're being rushed by enemies and you have to press the right face button on your controller before you are attacked by the bug. You do this for as long as you can before you eventually die, trying to get a good high score. If you do well enough, you can get different upgrades in the main game, which I really appreciated because it made me feel as if there was a point to it, instead of it just being a distraction from the story. Some of the minigames can go so fast though that it seems a little unfair at times, but despite all that, I still had a good time with them. They kind of reminded me of the fish catching minigame early on in the first Jak and Daxter, which I always really enjoyed for some reason, so it might be a little biased, but I like that they sort of called back to how arcadey and just simple the first game could be. So with all that said and done, would I recommend that you give Daxter a shot in 2024 if you were never able to play it on the PSP when it originally released? Honestly, yeah, especially if you're a Jak and Daxter fan or just want some nostalgia for the PSP era. For all its flaws, I had a genuinely good time playing it and was pretty amazed with what they were able to fit on a handheld back in 2006. It can be really frustrating at times, but it never truly feels like the game is trying to be unfair on purpose. On top of that, the trophies are extremely easy to get and the game doesn't overstay its welcome at all, so it's just something you can really easily breeze through in a day or two. I would never say that this is a game you have to finish, but at least give it a shot. It genuinely feels like, while this game might not be integral to the series, that Ready at Dawn had a fun time making it. I can't fault them for that, because for the most part, I had a fun time playing it. And that's all from me, guys. Let me know what your favorite Jak and Daxter game is down in the comments. I'd love to talk about this series some more in the future. Have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video.